Hey, I'm Brennan. It's about 7:30 on a cold January morning, and today I'm going to be trying to put some doors on this shop. The first thing I needed to do was make a threshold for the doorway. So I cleaned the area real good and measured for the threshold. I used some PVC trim and cut it to length, and then beveled the edges on the table saw. With the edges beveled, I could test fit it in the space to make sure it was a good fit. I applied some 100% silicone to the bottom of the threshold to make sure the bottom was watertight. I measure and mark for all my holes and use a drill to put them into the PVC trim. I then come back with a hammer drill and drill into the concrete, and I use Tapcon screws to fasten it down. And then I stopped for a minute because it was obvious that Tulip wanted some attention. The next step was to make a jamb to go around the door. I measured the opening and then cut my pieces to length. I installed the pieces just with screws and making sure the gap was consistent and everything was level. With the jamb complete, I could start working on the doors. I measured the side rails and then cut them to length on the miter saw. And then I cut my stretcher pieces, taking into account the width of the side rails. With all the pieces cut, I laid them out and dry fit them. I then drilled pocket holes in each end of the stretcher pieces to connect them to the frame. With all my pocket holes drilled, I could start connecting them to the side rails. To do this, I applied some glue and used a clamp to keep the two boards even, and then used some 3-inch screws to fasten them together. And I used this same gluing and clamping and screwing them together around the rest of the frame. and the frame was complete. I laid the plywood sheathing over top of the frame and squared it up on two edges, and I fastened it to the frame using some exterior screws. This is a pretty easy method of making a shed door, and it really helps if you have a flat surface, which I did not. But it worked out pretty well anyways. The doors I'm building are 4 feet wide, but they're not quite 8 feet tall, so I have to come back and trim this in with the skill saw. The plywood panel I'm using for the doors is made to overlap on the edges, so I'm using a router and a flush trim bit to come back and make it even with the frame. And here's a pretty cool slow motion shot of the router. Routers are very messy. The opening will have 2 doors, and I assembled the second one the same way. I'm also adding trim around the perimeter of the door, so I cut it all down on the miter saw, and then clean up the edges on the table saw, because this is some reclaimed material from the demo. With the trim pieces all cut down, I lay them out on the frame and use wood glue and exterior trim screws to fasten it to the door. I like using the exterior trim screws because they are threaded all the way up, so they grab real well, and they don't really have a head on them like a normal screw would. And with the trim all fastened on, my wife came and helped me sand everything down. The plywood panel that we used are pretty rough on the face, so we wanted to smooth that down and make it a little better surface for painting. With everything sanded smooth, I used some wood filler and filled all the screw holes and any of the imperfections that was in this old wood. I like using this kind of wood filler because it goes on pink, but then it dries to a natural wood color, so you know when it's dry. Once it was dry, I sanded everything lightly and made sure no other areas needed more wood filler. There were a few of the screw holes that did need more, so I applied more and waited for it to dry and then sanded the whole frame down. I cleaned the surface really well, and then it was ready for paint.
There's still a good bit of work to be done to the doors, and this video was running a little long, so I broke it into 2 videos, and I'll be posting the second part soon, and you'll get to see the color of the doors. They've turned out pretty well so far. I think you're going to like them. Please subscribe, and you'll stay up to date on our progress, and thank you guys for watching.